Luck with archaeologists have not been real good. You know, they didn't particularly like us and we didn't particularly trust them. So I said, if I go tell them about this, somebody's gonna steal it and claim that they found it. So, and I didn't really know for sure what I had found. Maybe some farmer had just pushed up a bunch of brush in 13 different piles and burned it. Well, we found the garbage pit. Well, we knew it was more than that. There was a village here. So all this burned stuff is from the village. So I hunt the area for a good while, not having a clue what I'm gonna find or what I'm supposed to be finding. I don't know about what happened at Mobilia at the time. I don't know about them having to melt down all their iron. I think maybe I'll find a sword or something. You're not gonna find any of that. It's just not there. They either lost it at Mobilia, they melted it down to make spikes and nails, or they made trinkets to trade to the Indians. And that's what I found mostly, right there. After they moved into this village, they stayed with the Chickasaws for 130 days. That's almost 4 months. That's a long time to be with the Chickasaws. But they weren't having any real disagreements with the Chickasaws like they did with the other Indians. One thing, they were beat up pretty bad. They were in no condition to get involved in a fight. So they were treating the Chickasaw Indians very well. And to get the things they needed, the foodstuffs, they were making things that they could trade to the Indians. Some of the things they were making were awls. The Indians are working hides and skins every day. Every time they killed an animal, stretch him out, scrape the hair and fat off, tan the hide. They need tools for doing that. They need knives, they need awls, and they need scrapers. If you look in this case over here, that's what you're gonna see. Scrapers and awls and possibly knives. I didn't know that to start with, but I started finding those things, and I don't know. So I show them to Brad Lieb, an archaeologist. Well, he don't know either. Maybe they're awls. Maybe they're crossbow points. We don't know. I know now what they were because the Indians were taking the material they had and turning it into scrapers and awls and knives. They were taking copper plates and cutting them up into pieces, hammering them out thin, punching a little hole in it and trading them to the Indians to hang in their ear. There's some in that case right over there. And you can tell the difference about when the Indians work with metal versus the Europeans. The Europeans have shears or scissors that they can cut it, or blacksmith tools where they can cut it. The Indians don't have that. They will scratch it and they will bend it until it breaks. So you'll have a rough edge or you'll have a smooth edge. If you got a smooth edge, it was made by the Europeans. If it's got a rough edge, probably made by the Indians. So that's the things that I had found. And I tried to get some archaeologists to come look at the place. They wouldn't even come look at it. They didn't want to hear about it, didn't want to know about it. I did get Brad Lieb to come one afternoon and spent about 2 hours and with some students, and they threw down a little 3x3 square, dug down, got some pottery and charcoal, and he called me in about a month and said, "You're going to be real happy about this." And I said, "Why?" He said, "The carbon-14 date from this was between 1540 and 1550. Well, 1541 is when it was there." So he was telling me, That is the right site, and I know it's the right site, but I'm not going to do anything about it. Why? Well, as Mr. Hudson says in his book, that Chicasa is down somewhere close to Lions Bluff, south of West Point, Mississippi. That can't possibly be true. Here's Lions Bluff, and it's right in the middle of the Choctaw land. You're wanting me to believe that the Chickasaws have got a major village sitting down here in the middle of the Choctaw territory? I don't think so. Now, folks that don't know that might believe that. It might sound good. And Mississippi State excavated a site on Lions Bluff. And they would love it. Did they find anything? Nothing. How about charcoal and dye? Nothing. Any scraper? Nothing. But we excavated it, so we would like De Soto to be there. So that's where they put him. Well, he's not within 40 miles of there. But all of these archaeologists were quick to jump on board with that. So when they are writing their books and they get to the Chickasaw part, they just jump over it. Well, heck, the Spanish were here for 130 days. There was a lot going on in the 130 days. Well, and it was cold, and they got 400 hogs to take care of. And the Indians were stealing some of their pigs, and they liked them. So on March the 4th, 1541, De Soto announces, we're packing up to move. We're moving on, and we want you to supply us with 200 people to carry our baggage. And the Indians said, we'll have to think about that. So, the story that Buddy and I have both told over and over and over again, that the brave Chickasaw attacked the Spanish to drive them out of their territory. Well, that's just not true. We thought it was, but it's not true. The Spanish are already packing up to leave. You don't have to attack them to make them leave. I mean, my goodness, they're leaving. That's what they always did. They always packed up and left. So, well then why did the Chickasaws attack them and burn their village? Well, let's look at the results of the battle. Early on the morning of March the 5th, the Indians sneak into the village and they set all the houses on fire. The Spanish come running out. A lot of them didn't have time to put their clothes on or get the weapons. So they're running around out there. Some of them have weapons, some don't. And the Indians over here shooting at them. The results of the battle was 1 Indian killed and 2 Spanish killed. Well, that really, compared to Movilla, where you lost 2,000 Indians and 20 Spanish, that wasn't much of a battle. But what else happened? Well, 400 hogs were burned to death. Now, anybody in this room believe in 2 hours' time you can burn 400 hogs to death? No. No possible way to do that. And 50 horses killed. No, that didn't happen either. So what really happened? Well, the Spanish were lying. Because if they write in their report, we were asleep and the Indians came up and stole 400 hogs and 50 horses, the king is not going to be happy. He's going to be really unhappy about it. So let's just tell the king that they burned all the hogs and killed the horses. Okay. So what was really happening? The Indians were keeping the Spanish all around the burned houses, and the rest of the Indians were out running the pigs off into the woods. And the horses. Brilliant idea. Now, De Soto can't go out and gather up his pigs and horses because we burned all his stuff. He don't even have any clothes anymore. So they stay there. There were about 7 horses that were killed. They stayed there and butchered the horses because they needed the meat. And they moved across the creek to another village, which was the village of the chief. Now, they stayed there for another 53 days. So if the Indians' purpose was to make them leave, that was a failure. If the Indians' purpose was to steal the pigs and horses, a brilliant plan. And nobody has ever, not one person in here, has written about what the Chickasaws did there. They're still telling the story of the Indians attacked them to run them off. No, they stole their stuff. That's the second time that's happened to De Soto. He can't go back to Spain because they probably gonna put him in jail. Or it's for certain take his command away from him. So they go into camp, and I just about guarantee everybody in this room has ridden by within a couple of 100 yards of the camp where he was in when he moved to the north side of Town Creek. If you know where the town of Nettleton is, where their sewage lagoon is, property there belongs to Mitchell Scruggs. It's in pine trees right now. That's the village. All of this shell material over here that you looked at all came from that village. Didn't have a clue. Hunted it for years. Even when Jordan was a baby boy, I took him down there and he got stuck in the mud, and we had no clue at that time that that was where De Soto had spent part of that winter. So he stays there until they run out of food. April the 24th, 25th, they're packing up to leave. So when they left, what did they do? Well, the narratives say they followed the road that the Indians used. Well, I've got that road right here on the map. I know where it went. And it left the west side of Nettleton, came up that bottom where Highway 45 is, between Nettleton and Shannon, and you stop right there. Now, what De Soto was trying to do was steal some corn, find some villages, steal their food, because we're out of food. So he stops there. He's got 2 things he can do. He can go to his left through Shannon and Palmetto and Bissell, or he can go to his right and go up through Brewer, City Point Road, Verona, into the Lee Acres area of Tupelo, hit what used to be Highway 6, West Main, follow West Main right out to Bissell. So he did both. He sent one group this way and one group this way. Well, 2 days after he leaves, he comes to a deep creek, and the Indians have built a fortification across the road. Well, if it had happened, and both of them are going to be Kunawa Creek, but if you're on that ridge between Shannon and Nettleton and you go north, you immediately hit Kunawa Creek. That's 1 day. And then you're into Brewer and on up. But it says 2 days. So 2 days means they went around by Shannon, Palmetto, Bissell. That puts you to Kunawa Creek in 2 days. Now, and something I had forgot about, but as you come down off of that ridge, before you cross Kunawa Creek there at Bissell, there's a subdivision on your right. There was a big Indian village out there. And that subdivision was built in the late 60s, early 70s. But I never found anything out there except just red flint and pottery. I found no metal, and found no beads. But that was where the village of the Alabama Indians was located. And that's where De Soto went to, and that's where he saw that barrier across the road. Right out here at Bissell, on the south side of the creek, where there, somewhere along there, maybe not where the road is, but somewhere along there is where the Indians had built this fortification to stop De Soto. Well, De Soto thinks that there's something valuable inside this stockade, some food that you're trying to protect. So he stopped, and they have another battle right out there across the creek from where your place is, Allie. They have a battle right there. And we don't know how many Indians were killed, but there was a bunch of Spanish that were wounded, and about 20 of them died later right there. And they're buried out there somewhere. The Spanish stayed there for 3 days, resting up after their battle, and then they moved on, headed toward Memphis. But that took place right here in the city limits of Tupelo, Mississippi, and probably needs a marker of some kind out there, because he crossed the highway right up there in front of Allen's property, headed right up that old road towards Sherman.
When did Hernando get wounded?
When?
Yeah,
It was
right after that, or?
about April the 28th or 29th of 1541 was the date. And there really does, Mr. Alderman, needs to be a marker, a historic marker of some kind put out there. This, I've got some artifacts that I've found here, and I've got another group of artifacts that I let Brad Lee borrow 7 years ago, and he's having a hard time returning them to me. But luckily I've got pictures of them, so I can show you what they look like. But I found other stuff since then. This being one of the items. It doesn't look like much. In fact, when I found it, it was thick and rust, and I started cleaning it. And this is iron, but these are brass braids in that piece of iron. Well, what is that? It's called brigandine armor. And it's what some of the Spanish were using. They would have a vest covered in these things, and it would stop any of the Indian arrows. And it also provided for movement. Now, they started off with metal breastplates, but you didn't need that to stop an arrow. And they got really hot out through in the sun when you're moving around. So this worked good. You could put this on a jacket and it would be covered with these little things right here. I didn't even know what it was when I found it. That has to be from Hernando de Soto, because there's no other group that came through this area that would have been using that. Once you start using flintlock guns, this is not of much value to it, because it won't stop a bullet, but it will stop an arrow. So, and De Soto is right there on the edge of using crossbows and gunpowder. So the next, there's no other way for it to be there except Hernando de Soto. There's another view of the other side. When I started cleaning it, I noticed those brass braids in there, and I thought, I don't know, this is something I had never seen before. It's over there in the case too. And also, an iron spear point. They were taking all the iron they had and turning it into nails and spikes so they can build the barges to cross the rivers. So now what they're making, and that's a broken one, a spear point. Now, if you want to kill an Indian, that'll work just fine, you know. Well, help. This is an awl that they could use when they're working with leather. They use stone tools. But one of the things that the Spanish were doing was turning nails and pieces of chain into awls that they were trading to the Indians, to the Chickasaw, for food stuff. This is how, when they were building the barges and they're having to pull the logs out of the woods, they take this and drive it into the log and hook a chain to it and pull it out. Two more awls, piece of chain. They were taking the chain, and I've seen chain break on one end lots of times. I've never seen a piece of chain break on both ends. I don't even know how that would happen. This has to be cut. They were cutting the chain, straightening it out, and making those awls that I just showed you. Let's help. I'm trying to get my pictures to come back up. That's what you get when you put an old man up here doing this. He's technology deprived. There we go. Just scoot it on down through there for me. There's the awls. Oh. They were having to repair the harness that they were using on the horses. And if you look right here, this one had been broken, and they repaired it so they could still use it. And I'm technology impaired.
There you go.
Right.
Go down just a little bit. The arrow.
Turn it around the right way. Here we go again. You better not sit down. You need to stay here. Okay, now let's try it.
She was a smart one.
Okay.
Okay, you got it upside down, this one.
Okay, there's two of the awls. That's the chain. That's what they're using to make the awls. A copper plate, which is what they're using to eat off of. And it makes perfect sense. If you're traveling around, you can't use ceramic plates, they're gonna break. You gotta have a copper plate. Now, this is the type arrowhead the Chickasaws were using after Hernando de Soto. At the time of De Soto, they were using red flint. But they noticed that these crossbow bolts that the Spanish were shooting at them will go all the way through an Indian. And their arrow, red arrow points are bouncing off of the Spanish, so we want the gray points. So they started using gray flint to make their point. And all through the historic period of the Chickasaw, that's what you're gonna see, is the gray flint. Another example. Okay. These came out of the garbage pit that you saw Buddy digging in a while ago. These are the points that would have been used at the time of De Soto at the village that he was staying in. They're red. After De Soto, they become gray. I asked one archaeologist why. Why did they go from red to gray? And he said, well, after they got horses, they could go up to Tishomingo and get the gray flint. They've been walking around for 10,000 years gathering up flint. They didn't have to have horses to do it. Okay. These belong to this man right here. You found them at Big Town? When De Soto came through, he was using iron crossbow points. And there's a couple in the case over there. He didn't really need that. The copper worked just as good, and he needed the iron for nails and spikes. This is the type of point that's being traded to the Chickasaws by the Luna expedition, which came in right behind De Soto. These are similar points that could have been made and used by De Soto. He was using crossbows. These would have worked perfect. I know this one was on a crossbow point from maybe 10 or 15 years after De Soto. All of them could be that date, but they most likely they are all Spanish. The first trade bead I ever found was like the red one right here. I didn't know what it was. Showed it to Gary Carnathan, and he said that's an Indian trade bead. It's what the Europeans were trading to the Indians. One bead that I have found down at this, I call it the De Soto site. It's just like that bead right there, except it's much smaller. And Brad Lee has it and won't give it back to me. This is the type of beads that are being traded to the Indians by De Soto. The chevron beads, this one is a Nueva Cadiz bead. You're not going to find many of those. I've got a couple of them. But that's the little small cornelian bead. I tried to blow it up and it didn't look that pretty. This is a shell earplug. This is what the Indians were wearing in their ear. They would cut holes in their ear and they would put spacers in there to make big holes in their earlobes. And then they would hang stuff like that in their ear. That came from the pit that you saw Buddy digging in a while ago. This is an ornament that Brad has also, but it's cut from copper and had a hole in it, and that's what they were hanging in their ear. There's a few smaller ones in that case over there. These are bells They call them Clarksdale bales, but they were what the Spanish was trading to the Indians. Shell material. The second site that De Soto moved into is there close to Nettleton. And I've got 3 cases full of shell material over here like this that came from that site. And that's middle 1400s. There's more of it. More ear pins. The site up on Kunawa, where the Indians had built the fortification to block the road, all of this stuff came from the ridge overlooking. This I'm not sure about. This came from over in Pontotoc County, but it's got a date late 1600s or early 1700s, maybe earlier than that. I don't know. It shows a little cherub with wings sitting on a dolphin. This is one of the earliest Chickasaw axes that I have found. It has marks on it right here. This dates probably around 1640 or earlier. I don't think it had anything to do with De Soto, but it's a very, very early axe. Came from south of the hospital in the Lee Acres area. This is a Spanish eye hoe. And I know Buddy's found some of them. They had this projection on the top of them. I'm not sure what it was for, unless it was just to knock a hole in the ground, put a seed in. But these are very early, and it's the type of hoe that De Soto would have had. These are 2 items that were found at Starkville. Brad found a late 1600, early 1700 site, and he let his imagination get away from him. And he was wanting it to be De Soto stuff, but this is trade material from the early 1700s. This is some more stuff that was found down at Starkville. At my De Soto site in northern Monroe County, I dug this. It is half of a copper plate. The Spanish took, when they were traveling, they were using copper plates because they don't break. And anything ceramic would have broken before they got here. Well, once they got with the Indians, they found out they could cut these plates up into strips and make them into ornaments, like the earpiece that I showed you a while ago. And I found one real thin neck piece, and that had been cut out of these plates. And there's another picture of it, more of it. And there's what it looks like when you kind of straighten it out. When I found it, it was just a wad of copper. I didn't know what it was. But it's a plate, and you can see where they've cut pieces out of it to make ornaments to trade to the Indians.
Julian, would that have gotten lost off of their travels, or how did it get that in that crumpled-like condition, do you think, because something like that?
This stuff is 480 years old. 480 years old. So, and it's in a pasture now, but it doesn't appear that it had ever been plowed, because the daub and the charcoal is there just exactly like what you would expect to find it. I think it's a site. And at first, with all that daub and charcoal, I didn't know if they just piled up a bunch of brush, some farmer, and burned it. But then I was finding pieces of charcoal that had been cut with a knife or a hatchet. Well, if you're just piling up a bunch of trash, you don't have to do that. But it's Indian house sites, and I actually have not excavated any of them, because I just knew that I wasn't gonna have to do that. The archaeologists were gonna come in and fall in love with my site and wanna get in there and excavate it. They won't even come look at it.
You think it's possible after the De Sotos went on the run, that they just discarded all the dead weight? Like if they were running from the Indians trying to stay alive, they wouldn't be trying to trade with them.
Well, most of the archaeologists that I've dealt with either were associated with Mississippi State or the University of Mississippi. And they really don't like us collectors very much, although we may know more about the subject than they do. The Mississippi State archaeologists are determined to put this Battle of Chicasa down close to Starkville.
Yeah.
Even though, like I showed you a while ago, that's Choctaw land. You can't be there. They want it to be there, and they've got a bigger microphone than I do. So that's where they've been putting it. That's not where it is. This, two pieces of pottery that came out of that pit that Buddy was digging in a while ago. It's referred to as Alabama applique. It comes from over around Moundville, Alabama. But it's in a pit right here in North Monroe County in Mississippi. This is more pieces of pottery. Most of this is walls, engraved pottery. It's coming from a big site up on the Mississippi River. There's a road that connects Cotton Gin Port on the Tom Bigby with the Memphis, Tennessee area. That's where this is coming from. And I was talking about what the Indians were doing with their ears. You only find these in garbage pits. The any archaeologist you talk to and ask him what that is, he's going to say it's a game piece. Okay, well, what game were they playing? Well, we don't know. Well, why are they in the garbage pit? Well, we don't know that either. Well, they weren't game pieces. What they would do, they stretched their earlobes. Some of them were hanging down real low. And they had to start off with a small hole. But then it kept getting bigger and bigger. And they'd cut it around the edges, and they would take one of these pieces of pottery and they'd knock it out into a circle and stick it inside there with probably some bear grease around it and let it heal up. And then once it did, they might do it again and put a bigger one in this time. So that's what, and those are coming out of that pit that Buddy was digging in. Okay, that's the end of that.
So Julian, have you studied his travels beyond Tupelo? How many more villages did he go through on his way to the Mississippi River, or?
Well, after he left the Nettleton site, he moves up the road headed toward Memphis. He gets right out here at Bissell, and the Indians have built a barricade across the road. So he thinks they're hiding something like their corn and beans and food stuff. So he stops, and they have actually a pretty major battle out there. There were 15 Spaniards died what, 2 miles from here? Not much further than that. After they finally ran the Indians out of the stockade, there was nothing in there. The Indians had just built it across the road to test the Spanish. And so then they leave there and head 7 days toward the Mississippi River, arrive somewhere south of Memphis, and stay there for about 30 days, build a barge across the Mississippi River. So, if you got a question, I'll try to answer it, but you'll have to talk up loud because I'm old and my hearing's not
So
good.
that was like a major road from Tupelo all the way to Memphis?
Yes.
So it went through the New
Yeah,
Albany
and
area?
if you want to look on these maps I've got right here, I've got it mapped out. What I did in 1979, I set up these topographical maps on one wall of my house. And then I got the original survey maps that were done in 1836. And I sat down and I transcribed all of the information on these original maps onto these maps.
Okay.
Now I can see where the roads are today, and I can see where the roads were in 1500.
Did that road go through past the Ingomar Mount?
No.
Okay.
It goes fairly close, but I think those mounds had probably been,
Abandoned.
and another thing, the Indians were trying to keep them away from those mounds.
Okay, I got you.
So they probably had some Indians that were guiding them up to the Mississippi River. They were trying to keep them away from the Ingomar Mounds, the Cahokia, Moundville, Etowah.
Mountville's a beautiful place.
Moundville was the important mound group in central Alabama. And these chronicles don't say anything about the Spaniards being there. So I think what Chief Tuscaloosa was doing was moving them away from those mounds. Even though they probably are not living there at this time, they're still sacred places to them. And I'm thinking they moved from those because the very earliest trade material that was coming into this area was also bringing diseases that the Indians did have no immunity to. So they were dying off and not understanding why they were dying. And that's when they get to Tuscaloosa's village, they describe it as a new village. And it only had one mound, and Moundville's probably got a couple of
Well, it's
dozen.
got a bunch.
A lot of them. But, okay, I'm gonna stop.
After you cross the
because
Mississippi
we probably
River-
about run out of time.
After he crossed the Mississippi River, he moved up a little ways to the parking mound site. There's where they
Well,
erected a
the-
cross. They think they found evidence of the cross being erected, and they celebrated a big mass there. They have a bunch of the Chevron beads there too.
My guess on the crossing of the Mississippi River is follow the road. Because I got the road that the Indians were using, they were still using it in 1836. It may have been a little further south in the 1500s, but follow the road. Where it hits the Mississippi River is gonna be really, really close to where DeSoto. But now, they want it to be all the way down
Parks there.
to Natchez, you know? And Jeffrey Brain said at one time, what we ought to do is get a flashing sign and just move it up and down the Mississippi River. Put it in Greenville one time, and then Greenwood, and then Vicksburg, and let everybody have it. But you can be pretty sure that if you follow that old road where it ran into the Mississippi River is where DeSoto first saw the river.
Was he dead when they got to the Mississippi River?
No, He died about a year later over in Arkansas,
Okay.
but he could never go home again.
Yeah.
And what finished him off was when he lost the instruments they used for saying mass.
Yeah.
The church was not going to forgive that, and he knew it. Now, what happened to those things? I think De Soto got outsmarted big time there. Tuscaloosa gave him those carriers to carry, and the soldiers were giving the Indians everything that was too heavy for them to carry. They were giving it to the Indians. And the Indians carried it right up to the fort and set it down. And all the Indians had to do was come outside and get it and carry it inside. And De Soto was saying, what the heck? You know, they got my stuff and I've got to get it back. The kings are going to be mad. The Pope's going to be mad. So he killed all the Indians and lost nearly all of his baggage. From then on, he was pretty much destitute. What he didn't lose at Movilla, when he got to North Monroe County, he lost it there. And that picture of him at the Mississippi River with all his fine uniforms, that's just fiction. That didn't happen.
How did he die?
How did he die? He got a fever over in Arkansas and died, and they buried him on land. Then they got to thinking that the Indians don't need to know that he is dead, because they thought he was a messenger from the gods. So they dug him up and dropped him in the Mississippi River so the Indians would not be aware that he had died. I appreciate y'all showing up. I hope it was entertaining. And maybe it would be, Buddy can remember back when we were younger, we had a group that would meet down at the Tom Bigsby building in Verona once a month, and everybody who was interested would come and bring their show and tell, and we'd have different programs every month about different subjects. I think that would be great to do that again. If anybody's interested in that, I'm sure Mr. Chris could set that up for us, and we could meet right here, and you could bring your show and tell, and maybe get a pretty good group of folks coming. It'd be nice for us old guys, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, you're welcome to look at books.